Welcome, colleagues. Hello. Good to see all of you.
Good afternoon.
We have some questions. So we have our esteemed colleagues. We have Elaine, Juanita, Samer. I'm sure many of you have met them. If you haven't, you will want to after this conversation. We're going to pose questions to you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So I am going to start with you, Samer. And we saw you in the video, a little clip,
Indeed.
Talking about immigration detention in Canada.
Yeah.
You've worked on the Welcome to Canada campaign for a number of years now, and there's been a new win recently. Can you share how you came to launch the campaign and just talk a little bit about what you've been able to achieve, or what we've been able to achieve?
Absolutely. So for years I've been working on issues around immigration detention in Canada and the horrible conditions that people face in immigration detention. And we published reports, we met with federal officials, we shared survivor stories, and we were largely ignored by the federal government. So we changed tactics, and really we went to the provincial governments instead of waiting for Ottawa. And in those places, in the provincial governments, we saw provincial detention happening in the jails, really the worst conditions that you can imagine. And focusing on the provinces really shifted everything for us. And that kind of pivot was only possible because of how Human Rights Watch operates. As researchers and advocates, we're encouraged to dream, to take strategic risks, and really to focus on impact, and to not take no for an answer. When we faced the challenge of the federal government and we pivoted, that really allowed us to sort of create a campaign that's now reshaping policy across the country. The campaign called Welcome to Canada was launched in 2021, and it was launched with Amnesty International and partners. And people, including Canadians, including perhaps many of you in this room, are often shocked to hear that Canada detains people on immigration grounds, on administrative grounds, and really abusive jail conditions that are inherently punitive. And our research shows that racialized detainees, particularly black men and people with disabilities, are routinely given harsher treatment, more restrictive conditions, and routine denial of basic rights. So we mobilize hundreds of advocates, of lawyers, healthcare providers, people from the medical community, alongside dozens of people with lived experience and social justice organizations, to call for an end to the use of provincial jails for immigration detention. And more than 30,000 people wrote letters through email to federal and provincial leaders asking for that practice to be abolished. And the support really helped us press officials at every level, through city halls, through provincial governments, and through federal ministries. And it worked. One by one, each province has committed to ending the use of provincial jails for immigration detention. And that's a huge win. But despite these commitments, the federal government is still pushing back and trying to renew these agreements and use federal penitentiaries now for immigration detention. So that's why we've taken the fights to the international stage. And in March, myself, along with some colleagues, went to Geneva to meet with the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as part of Canada's review, the review of Canada's disability rights record. And our recommendations were actually accepted by the committee, and for the first time a UN body has called on Canada to abolish immigration detention altogether in favor of community-based alternatives, and also to replace the paternalistic designated representative system with a more supportive system that respects legal capacity and people's autonomy. And the committee's concluding observations offers us an extraordinary gift, a tool that we can use with our partners to hold Canada to account, and to make sure that in federal ministries and courts and the courts of public opinion, we can sort of push this issue further. We have a new government in Canada. I'm excited about this, the prospect of advocating with the new government, and we're committed to this issue. Until the day when people in Canada are no longer detained, no longer lose their freedom, their autonomy and dignity because of where they come from or because of their disability, we're going to be pushing this and hopefully seeing more impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Samer. It's really extraordinary. And I just really quickly want to acknowledge how hard the Canada Committee has worked on this too, and been involved in supporting this. So it's been such a team effort. So thank you, Federico.
Elaine, let me come to you now. You're the director of our Asia division. People here have heard a lot already about the President Duterte, but they haven't heard yet what was the role of Human Rights Watch behind the scenes that contributed to this historic outcome.
Well, thank you, Federico. And yeah, it's been quite a year. But, you know, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'd like to tell you a bit of the backstory of how Human Rights Watch has been working on that case. And it goes all the way back to 2008. Actually, I was quite freshly joined to HRW. I was the Deputy Asia Director. And we did an investigation that looked at a pattern of killings that was happening in a town in Mindanao called Davao City, where Rodrigo Duterte at the time was the mayor. And we sent 2 researchers from Human Rights Watch, Kay Suk and Anna Neistat, one of our emergencies researchers, and they investigated this pattern of hundreds of killings of street children, petty criminals, drug users, young men, and the killings fit a pattern. You know, basically what would happen is that the victims were generally stabbed or shot to death. The assailants often came in pairs. They were often killed in a public place with witnesses around, sometimes in broad daylight in the street or in the market. And you know what they also had in common was the fact that no one was ever held to account for these killings. And often in advance, the victim or their family had been warned that their name was on a list, that if they didn't stop their criminal ways, then they would be next. And the report that we produced, we called it "You Can Die Anytime," because that was a direct quote from Mayor Duterte at the time. And he said, if anyone takes a cue from that, that's fine. So we investigated these killings. We put out the report in 2009. I actually flew down to Davao City in 2009, and I testified at a hearing by the Commission on Human Rights, and it was chaired by a very feisty lawyer called Laila de Lima. And I think that was the first time, actually, that Duterte was called as a witness, and he was publicly grilled on these killings. I spoke on behalf of Human Rights Watch, presented our evidence, and Clarita Alia, the woman that you just saw just then in the video, she also gave evidence. She was one of the very brave victims, and she spoke about how 4 of her sons were gunned down over a period of years, one after the other. It was really, really horrifying. And so then, you know, the case drew on. 2012, they launched an independent investigation by the Ombudsman into local official involvement in the killings. But nothing happens as a result. And as you know, in 2016, Duterte becomes the president of the Philippines. And he takes this killing spree nationwide. And the bodies are piling up. You know, it's not just hundreds anymore, it's thousands, and then it's tens of thousands. And bodies are being found, gagged, wrapped in packing tape, sometimes with a cardboard cut-out sign saying that this person is a drug dealer. And so what we did again was we investigated these killings. Anyway, we did this report. It was called License to Kill, and it focused on how basically the police were falsifying evidence in their police reports in order to claim that the killings were in self-defense, that someone had attacked them. And we wanted to show that this wasn't the case. So in 2017, that report came out. It said these killings constitute probably crimes against humanity and that the International Criminal Court should investigate. In 2018, the International Criminal Court opened their investigation. And this is because the Philippines is one of the rare countries in Asia that has actually ratified the Rome Statute. Duterte immediately tried to pull out of the Rome Statute. He said, no, we're not having this. But what he didn't realize was that that process takes a year. And in that time, because the investigation was underway, you can limit the jurisdiction, but you can't get out of the investigation. And so, you know, obviously fast forward to this year, and we saw that an arrest warrant had been issued. The Philippines authorities acted on that arrest warrant when Duterte was returning from Hong Kong, and he was transferred to The Hague, where he's now sitting in custody. And I want to say that, you know, this work, obviously Human Rights Watch has, you know, for a long time been documenting these cases, but it's also because of the power of women like Maria Ressa, who's paid a huge price in terms of the lawsuits, the harassment, the intimidation against her. Laila de Lima, who I mentioned, who chaired that very first Commission on Human Rights hearing, she later became a senator, and she was trying to get a Senate investigation into these killings. She went to jail, she went to police detention for 7 years She was never convicted of any crime. But, you know, this is how they were targeting people. And they're very brave organizations and journalists in the Philippines who we've been working with on this. So I think this is a story of persistence, of courage, of the need to be relentless in the quest for justice. We worked very closely with our international justice colleagues for many years who have that expertise on the International Criminal Court. And I plan to be there in September when Duterte will face the confirmation of charges hearing. And, you know, I really look forward to standing side by side with some of the families of victim members who've been waiting for this day for justice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. I think so many of us at Human Rights Watch were absolutely glued to our screens or whatever watching that transfer to The Hague. Juanita, I have a question for you. So for a very current illustration of our work, as Federico referenced earlier, can you talk about how Human Rights Watch is addressing unlawful deportations of people from the U.S. to countries in Latin America and what we're doing along with our partners to combat that?
Sure, thank you, Angie. So as you've heard already, what Trump has done by branding migration into the U.S. as an invasion has de facto created a system of stripping migrants of safeguards that have been created legally in the U.S. to protect migrants from wrongful deportation. So let me share with you the story of one of the migrants that Bill and the rest of the team interviewed in Panama. Kashin, she is a 21-year-old woman from Afghanistan. She was forced to flee her country when she was 17 years old because she was being forced to marry a 56-year-old Taliban man that was close to his family. She went to Iran, to Turkey, to Cyprus. She was raped twice during her journey. She finally was able to fly to Brazil, and from Brazil she walked through the whole continent, including through the Darien Gap, to be able to reach the US. She told our researchers that she attempted suicide through her way because of everything that she had suffered. When in January she got to the border through Tijuana in Mexico, she actually managed to cross into the US. She wanted to be able to speak to the migration agent with everything that she had faced, which clearly meant that she had an asylum case. She was denied that opportunity. Instead, she was put in detention for 10 days in very abusive conditions. She mentioned to our researchers that she was never able to see the sky during those 10 days. Then in February, without telling her, she was just taken to a plane and immediately deported to Panama. She only realized she was in Panama because she had crossed previously the Darien Gap. So what are we doing at Human Rights Watch in cases like this? We are using the capacity that we've had for decades throughout Latin America to document cases like Kashin and be able to use that evidence in courtrooms in the US to constrain abusive executive power. We have been able to deploy our researchers to interview people like Kashim and interview people that have been recently deported to Panama, to Costa Rica, to El Salvador, that have been deported to Guantanamo, to Venezuela. We've been able since January to have 200 interviews in more than 10 different languages. Just because the kind of network that you see here allows us to be able to connect with our researchers that can speak with Russians, that can speak with Afghans, that can speak with people that were fleeing from China, and immediately be able to deploy that sort of network. In hours' notice, we were capable of working with our partners locally to be able even to provide for basic food and a place to sleep of busloads of migrants that were being just thrown into Panama, and alert the media so that we can raise awareness. But most importantly, in March, we worked collectively across different divisions at Human Rights Watch to be able to present a sworn declaration to Judge Boasberg in the US to be able to show all of the conditions that we had previously documented of torture, of ill treatment, of abusive conditions in the prison system in El Salvador. That declaration was used by the US courts to establish that Venezuelans deported to El Salvador were facing irreparable damage. And that declaration has now been used in total in 9 cases in the US, including recently in the Supreme Court decision that ordered the Trump administration to stop sending Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. We have, since then, tried to work also with our partners locally to be able to make sure that authorities in places like Colombia, like Uruguay, like Mexico, can provide at least a fair chance for people like Hashim to have an opportunity of presenting their asylum case. Because as of today, Hashim is sadly still stranded in Panama with a temporary permit that expires on the 7th of June. What do we know in Latin America about this? Is that because we've faced authoritarian leaders, we know that it's about resisting, it's about litigating, it's about not giving up. But we also know that it's possible to defeat them. It's possible, but it's only through a strong civil society that can sustain that line that we can defend democracy and we can defend the rule of law. And it's thanks to this network of people that I think we are well placed to be able to sustain this sort of fight in Latin America to constrain abusive deportations that are happening now from the US.
Thank you, Juanita. Okay, so I'm told we have 10 minutes now to turn it over to you. So please ask any questions you have of our colleagues on the stage. We also, as you know, have many of our colleagues in the audience, so don't be shy. And can I ask that when you ask a question, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're from.
Jane Clifford from Sydney, Australia. I'd like to address this question to Elaine. In somewhat of a gloomy outlook on the world, you have spoken to us also about the other positives, not just what is happening in the Philippines, but in other parts of Asia where we see where the strength of civil societies is so important, and how the people can rise up sometimes against government when they are doing the wrong thing. Can you elaborate on some of the other good spots or good things that are happening that you've talked to me about anyway? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Jane. And yeah, we were talking about this a little bit. Look, I think, at a time when it feels like the very legitimacy of human rights is being called into question, what I see in Asia is that ordinary people all across the region recognize the value of human rights, and they're prepared to risk their lives, their liberty, for those rights. And, for instance, last year, we saw that in Bangladesh, where, Sheikh Hasina, the previous leader, had ruled that country with an iron fist for the past 15 years, holding sham elections, and there was a student-led protest movement that quickly galvanized into a nationwide movement, and it was successful in ousting Hasina. And in January, I visited Bangladesh, and I got to meet Muhammad Yunus. We'll actually have a session, I think, right after this one, talking about what happens when a regime falls. So I don't want to give too much away. But Bangladesh actually, it is one of those hopeful, rare stories where the protesters really won. And it was really inspiring to get to meet these student leaders when I was there. South Korea, also, late last year. I mean, we were not expecting to see martial law being declared in South Korea. And very, very quickly, you saw people come out onto the street in the dead of night, despite the fact that it was midwinter, and, protest this decision. And, it may have been a bit messy, but the checks and balances on the institutions, they worked. And so the former president has been impeached. There's going to be elections in South Korea, and there was an attempt at a massive abuse of power. But unlike Myanmar, where the generals successfully had a coup, that didn't happen in South Korea. And then Sri Lanka, I would say, is the other sort of bright spot. We were talking about this last night. We were trying to think of, it's very easy to pick all the places where things are declining. But Sri Lanka also recently had elections, and people resoundingly voted for change. They didn't want, a continuation of corruption and the nepotism and the lack of accountability that they'd seen under, the Rajapaksa family. And so we'll see how it goes. But, I think the fact that we can have elections like that, we've had elections here in Canada and Australia recently where, the Trump effect, frankly, has worked quite well in ousting the people who would like to sort of rule through divisive politics of hate and fear that Maria Ressa was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Thank you. Leslie from Los Angeles. It's so impressive to hear the three of you talk about our advocacy and the sort of results of our work. But Federico began with talking about, our currency being our reporting. And you were talking about, our reporting on denials of free expression in the United States. And I'm wondering if any of you could just sort of describe the way that our reporting differs from, for example, the way the New York Times reports or other journalists reports. What is our secret sauce and the importance of the way we report?
Do one of you want to?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. Really, the secret sauce is that we have an incredible expertise across different, not only thematic, but also regional areas. So we have, when we write our reports, sometimes I think it's more stressful getting it through the vetting process at Human Rights Watch than it is actually being in a conflict zone doing the research, because it's really like the scrutiny that you receive, it's so difficult because every sentence is probably changed by the time the report comes to fruition. And even though it can be a very exhausting and difficult process, you leave the process an expert on every sentence of that report, and it becomes impossible to sort of impeach any of the findings or facts in that report. And if you look at the criticism that we receive at Human Rights Watch for our reports, it's never on the facts, right? It's never on the evidence. It's always, other arguments that are used. And really, it's because that's our power, right? We don't have an army. We can't convince or strong-arm governments to do what we want them to do. We can present them with facts, with evidence, and recommendations based on international law, and sort of having that expertise in-house and having that really rigorous process is really, it's night and day. I used to work as a journalist before, and really the fact-checking that happens at Human Rights Watch, I don't think anyone else in the world sort of has that type of experience. But like I said, it creates an incredible product that stands the test of time.
And I would add, in the case of Latin America, that our global, and in the case of Latin America, our regional scope allows us to have a very apolitical and unbiased perception throughout the region. We criticize as strictly Bukele from El Salvador than we do Maduro in Venezuela. So whenever civil society locally is criticized for being biased, we never are criticized for that, because we've been as strong regardless of what's the ideological background, because our bottom line is the facts, and it's international human rights law.
Hi, Beth Ann Day with the New York Executive Committee. In the years that I've been attending these incredible events, I've seen you have to withdraw physical presence in Russia as well as mainland China. And I guess I would love to hear a little bit of, what you are able to do currently in those regions, and are there any other countries like that have been impacted, and is there a path forward to get back into Russia, China at some point?
Do we have...
Hugh is there.
Shall I start?
Sure, so we also probably have Tanya
Sure.
and... Okay.
Should get a second question.
Do we have Tanya here? There's a session on this. Okay. Okay. You want...
Marty Krasny, San Francisco and Silicon Valley. This is not quite a question, it's a comment, but maybe it's a fundamental question. I came in this morning, I had a very nice breakfast. I have lived a life where I check almost all the boxes for privilege. I went into a room where a stranger had a microphone, and she told me that because I had a white card, I had smallpox. And I sat down, and I didn't question it. And I think almost nobody questioned it. We got off the blankets when they told us to, and we sat down. And I've been thinking for the last 3 hours of the implications about when a fact is not a fact. And when I was told something that I knew wasn't true, and I sat down and died because she asked me to. So I'm just kind of putting that out as a cry from the heart about what we're up against when people tell us things that we know aren't true, and we accommodate to them.
Thanks, Marty.
I think can we take the questions on the...
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to start with
I
that,
think
or do you want
Federico
to start?
will
Federico?
I mean, I
Okay.
can talk in general, because Russia and China are two examples, but we are seeing this and we are expecting this in many other places. Sometimes the lack of access is also because of security and not necessarily because the government. So what we are doing, and you will hear in these 3 days, among other things, is increasing our capacity to do remote research, increasing our use of technology to supplement the evidence that sometimes we are not able to do to gather in the place with technology, with interviews done in third countries. So we are continuing. We have no intention of stopping work in these countries. Precisely when we are banned, that is usually a sign that we need to continue working on them, and we have ways of continuing the research and the important work.
And just, I mean, in terms of Asia, so I joined Human Rights Watch in late 2007, and that is something that I've noticed over the time that I've been with the organization, is that, many of the countries in my region where we should be, access is getting much, much more difficult. So Afghanistan, Myanmar, where we had people on the ground, we can't have people on the ground there anymore. China, well, we never actually had, a presence in China, but we did have a presence in Hong Kong, and it's not possible now because of the passage of the national security law. So we are finding lots of other ways of doing that work. It involves trying to talk to people who have recently left the country. It involves doing remote interviews, through various technologies. It also involves utilizing our colleagues who work for the Digital Investigations Lab, who do amazing work, as Federico mentioned, using satellite imagery, but also photo and video verification. Because the other thing that has changed in the time that I've been at Human Rights Watch is nowadays everyone has a mobile phone. And so people are documenting stuff that is happening. They are flooding the zone with that information. And so a big part of what we do is actually having to verify what is actually true. And so to come back to the second question about facts, yes, that is such a key part of our job. And, I know that I have sat sometimes, with people and been unsure about whether the story that we're being told is true. We always need to make sure that we get more than one account of a story. So, we need to be very careful because our reputation is at stake. And especially, in a world of misinformation and distortion and lies, we are rigorous about ensuring that the information that we put out is accurate and is correct.
Thank you. Okay, I am sadly told that we are at time. So thank you, everyone, for your questions, for your attention, to our colleagues for your expertise, and much more to come. Thank you.
Thank you.